Abortion, reproductive freedoms are a third rail issue almost in this country. They're extremely political. And I do want to talk about reproductive rights a little bit more broadly. Ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned in 2022, we saw Democrats really galvanize voters around this issue of abortion access. And more broadly, do you think Republicans are losing to Democrats when it comes to messaging around these types of issues?
No, I think that Democrats that talk about that issue are, one, they don't know how to read the Constitution. They don't know what the Constitution means. It's a states' rights issue. It's not supposed to be a federal issue. And I believe that the initial ruling on that was unconstitutional, which was why it was overturned recently. A lot of people don't realize that. Federally, we shouldn't be voting on that. That should be up to the states to decide. And frankly, if you don't like it, move out of your state, move somewhere else. But honestly, that's exactly how our founding fathers engineered our country, and that's really the beauty of, I think, this job and this position. So I think a lot of people said, well, would you ever vote to federally ban it? And I again say that is a states' rights issue. Anyone that will tell you that Congress is up here and going to vote on that, they're just trying to get you to the polls to vote for them. They know damn well that that's not going to happen. But I will say this, I am personally pro-life, and I do believe that life begins at conception. And I am a mom. I have, family members that have had babies via IVF. And so what I will tell you is that it can be done responsibly, but I really, really hate when people try to take this conversation out of context, because it's not like they're doing it to actually help people, right? Like, you kind of saw the debacle that happened with really how they try to paint me, and here I am actually trying to help the issue. So I think that the more that we have these discussions, the more that we can take this conversation and just have it in a respectful fashion, I think it can bring a lot of good. But I also want to clarify that there's a really big difference between IVF and abortion. And so for any one side to say that it's one and the same is simply false.
The majority of Americans do believe that, or don't support the overturnal of Roe v. Wade. And I am curious, do you think that Republicans need to come to more of a consensus when it comes to this topic? Because we've seen some say there should be a ban after 6 weeks. Donald Trump, in an interview this past weekend, said that he wasn't completely opposed to the idea of 16 weeks, but he didn't say that that was going to be for certain. But do you think that there needs to be more consensus from your party?
I think that there needs to be more of a clarification on what that means to people, because a majority of people thought that in that overturning that it was going to outlaw abortion altogether, which actually was not true. It would go back to the states to decide. But again, that goes into the national messaging of what it actually means to have a government that has been engineered the way that it has. And so, if you want my personal opinion, if I were in a state legislature, I'd say, hey, look, we need to look at the science. There's been massive developments in science since the actual initial ruling. And I think that would help people make better decisions and really understand what constitutes life. My personal belief and perspective is I actually really came to my conclusion on my opinion on this matter after a developmental biology course where I actually went and I actually had to cut the limb off of a developing chicken. And I saw what happened when I had the scalpel underneath that microscope. And so we can get into my personal beliefs, but look, I'm federally legislating. I'm not at the state level. So my state of Florida, I support their decisions, but I can tell you that in the federal government, that's not something that we are addressing. And so there is a lot of clarification. But again, in this business, what I found is people do things because they want power. They do things without the intention of actually understanding how that's going to affect people. They simply just want to get reelected. And I'm not going to play that game.
Do you think then, to that point, there's anything missing from the national conversation when it comes to IVF?
Yeah, I think that more people need to say, hey, look, we know people that have been impacted by this. I think Congress has one ability, that is to use the power of the purse. And so if they're serious about that, they need to say, hey, look, people should have the right to try this. And I want to just point out that I actually did try to model this after what President Trump did with the right to try experimental treatments for those that were terminally ill. I think that, we have a lot of people, they might not necessarily tell you, especially women in the workforce that might be a little bit older, that they are struggling with infertility. I think that as we see the population decline and we see infertility rates rise, I think that this is going to be a more common approach, and I think that this should be more of a topic of discussion. But again, it's expensive. A lot of people can't afford this. People are sometimes moving to different states as a result of this. And so I really just hate the fact that people are making this political. It shouldn't be. But again, going back to, common sense approach in Washington, I also didn't know that there wasn't any such thing as maternity leave for Congress members. And yet, here we are having the same discussion. So I think there's more to come on this topic.